Hello, welcome. It's Jennifer. I'm so glad you're here. I have a long video for you again today, but in it, I am showing you several ways to do shadow box cards in different sizes and in different orientations. By showing you all of these examples, I'm hoping that you will feel comfortable enough to do a shadow box card using products you have in any size you want. Shadow box cards may sound complicated, but they're not, and it's a great way to make your card really stand out. Now I'm going to show you all of the examples in real life here before we get started. As I mentioned, I'll be showing different sizes, so I'll do each variation of a shadow box in 5x7 and in 4 1/4 by 5.5 inches. I will also show vertical and horizontal cards. And I have two different types of shadow boxes. One that has a front shadow box on the front of a normal card, and then the other style is a full-on shadow box. So you'll see the difference as we go through these. Now the nice thing about all of these cards is they flatten nicely to go into envelopes, and then they pop up when you take them out and look amazing on display. No special tools are needed to create them. All right, let's get started with this example. It is a 5x7 vertical card, so portrait card, with a shadow box front. So it's a normal note card with a shadow box that pops up on the front. Now, if you have never done a 5x7 card, I highly recommend it. It is such a fun change of pace, and I've really been enjoying them. But if you rather do a typical A2, I'll have an example for that next. Now for this card and many others today, I'm using the new Pinkfresh Studio Nested Arches die set, and there is a hot foil plate set that coordinates with it. You can buy these separately, so pick and choose what you want. I just like that Pinkfresh does kind of these suites of products where there are things that can be used together or separately. I will be using the foil plates on the first card, but then I won't be doing any other foiling the rest of the video. Now, along with this, there is a 6x8 stamp set called Around the Shape Arches, and these are stamps that fit perfectly into those arch shapes. They go really well together, and I'll be demonstrating using those today too. And they also have a regular stamp set that has a floral arch on it and a little floral corner that really matches up nicely with the arch die set. There's a coordinating die to cut out these pieces and coordinating stencils to color in those floral pieces. So again, this is a great opportunity to pick and choose what you like. If you prefer to color, you could just color in those images. I'm using the stencils because that's a big time saver for me. I like that they also include in the stencil set a mask for an arch. So if you don't want to use the dies, you could instead do like a one-layer card with that masked area. Now, I'm not going to show the stenciling in the video. This video is long enough as is, and it's just basic stenciling, following the layering stencils that Pinkfresh has. And I use Pinkfresh dye inks for it, but you could use whatever you want. You could use any colors you want. Now, when I do layering stencils that also have a stamp set that coordinates with it, I oftentimes like to do the stenciling first and then stamping on top. That way I get a nice crisp stamped image on top of our coloring. So I have my stenciled pieces here. I did a bunch all at once, and I'm placing it into my Altenew stamp wheel. This is a new type of stamp platform. Many people have asked me about it. I'm not going to talk much about it in this video. I'm still learning with it and figuring out the ways of using it. There are many ways to use it. I will cover it in a future video, but I always like to really get to know a product before I talk a lot about it in a video. So bear with me. I'm just using it today to do basic stamping. You could use any stamp platform or acrylic block to do this process. But overall, one of the nice things about the stamp wheel is the platform on the inside is like the material of a stamp, so that your paper kind of sticks to it. And you can rotate that platform around, flip it around. You'll see me do a little bit of that later on. But again, use whatever stamping tool you have. Here I'm just stamping with black ink over some of my florals. Some of the others I decided to do some heat embossing with gold embossing powder. Now, I like to do a bunch of stenciling at once. Instead of just creating one little floral piece here, I did several so that I could make several cards and have some left over for later. That's especially helpful with layering stencils. When you have them out, you might as well use them for more than one project. Okay, so now I have some pieces where I've gold heat embossed, some where I've stamped with black ink. I'll use the blue images with the black ink for this card, and I'll save these that I have here in my hand for our next card. Okay, so now that I've done the stenciling and then the stamping, I'll use the coordinating die, and look at that, it cuts all the pieces out beautifully. And these have a nice arch to it that match nicely up against these arch dies that I'll be using, or you could just use them against a circle die that you may have. Now that we have these pieces ready, let's do the shadow box itself. Let me show you the completed card again. Notice that it is a note card and the front of it pops up like a shadow box. So the back of it is a normal note card. It's just that the front kind of pops up. It kind of arches forward too, which is a really cool look. All right, so let's get started with that front panel. And I've cut a piece of white cardstock that is 7 inches by 7 inches. Onto it, I'm going to stamp this background stamp from Pinkfresh Studio. There is a layering stencil that matches with this, but I am just using this stamp, and I'll stamp it twice onto my background so that it has a little interest. Again, this piece is 7 by 7. This will create a 5 by 7 shadow box card. I'm placing that piece of cardstock into my stamp wheel and lining up that cling stamp right across the top center. And I'll stamp this with a blue ink. Now, when I ink up this piece, I'll flip the wheel over and I'll press it down. I'm using the Pinkfresh Studio stamp press. That's the tool that I'm grabbing here. That just allows you to really put pressure down, but you can use your hand if you prefer. All right, now I'm going to stamp this stamp again on the bottom half of this, towards the center once again. And the nice thing about the stamp wheel here is instead of stamping it just like I did before, the same orientation, I'm just rotating this platform or this wheel here so that the stamp is on the bottom. So watch, I'll rotate it and I'll press it down here. And now I have the same image stamped along the bottom of this cardstock. Because of the size cardstock I'm using, there is a little overlap there in the middle, but that won't be noticeable when we do the shadow box card. And you could do any stamping here with any stamping tool. Okay, so now we need to do some score lines. I will be doing a score line, a 1/2 inch and 1 inch from both of the sides of this piece. So remember, this was a 7 by 7 inch piece of cardstock, and I'm scoring a 1/2 inch and 1 inch from both of the sides. This will give us a shadow box pop-up feature on the front of a 5 by 7 card. So now I have the 2 score lines on each side, and we'll fold along those. On the inner score lines, I will fold away from me. Then on the outer score lines, I'll fold towards me, which creates kind of a Z fold on the sides. And these folds are what kind of gives that spring action to turn this card into a shadow box card. So there you can see what it looks like from the side. You'll see this kind of fold many times in this video. All right, now for the window in the front. I'm using one of the arch dies from the Pinkfresh Nested Arches die set, and I'm placing it right in the center between the 2 inner score lines, and I'll tape that in place. And then before I put this through my die cut machine, I'm going to flatten those folds out. So I'm going to just flatten everything, run it through my die cut machine. We can refold those edges once we're done. And now we have the window for the front of our shadow box card. You can make this window smaller or bigger. Any shape die would work here: circle, square, rectangle, anything. All right, so now we'll refold those sides there. And now we have the front of our shadow box card. I thought I'd use those Nested Arches hot foil plates along with the dies just for a bit of shine. You could skip this if you wanted to. I have a Spellbinder's Glimmer machine here, which allows you to do foiling with hot foil plates. I have the Arches hot foil plate here that I'm taping face down onto a piece of white cardstock. I like to create a little hinge at the top there. It just is really helpful with the process. Now I'll take a piece of Glimmer hot foil. This is the Prism, which is one of my favorite. I'll slide that between the arch hot foil plate and my cardstock, so the pretty side of the foil touches the pretty side of the hot foil plate. I will now take this and put it face down onto my Glimmer machine. I did have quite a bit of foil hanging off here. I'm going to trim some of that off so I can save it for a sentiment foil later on. And here I'll put a little bit of piece of tape here just to hold everything in place. Now I'll put this face down onto the warmed up Glimmer machine. I'll put the 2 plates on top, press the timer button. When the timer button stops flashing, which is about a minute or so, I'll take all of those platforms out and run it through my Spellbinders Platinum 6 die cut machine. So the glimmer machine provides heat, the die cut machine gives the pressure, which gives a beautiful foil look. If you have a different die cut machine, there are other foil machines out there. All right, so now I have this negative space foil I can save for something else, and we're just going to use this foiled arch on this card. I'm taking one of the arch dies that's slightly smaller than the foiling we just did, placing it on the inside, and then running that through our die cut machine to create a window with the foiling on the edge. I'm now putting glue around the outside front of this, and then I'll place this on the back of the window on the front of our shadow box pop-up. So this is just giving a little bit of shine around that. And that extra cardstock that we just glued there gives more support to the front of our shadow box piece. Now I need a piece of cardstock that will show through this window, and I decided to go with a bright blue, and I cut this to be smaller than 5 by 7. Really anything smaller is fine. This is about 4 by 6 3/4 inches. Really doesn't matter, just as long as it's smaller than 5 by 7. I placed that into my stamp wheel, and I've placed the front of our shadow box on top of it just to get the placement. And I've got these little arch stamps that I'm lining up with our arch window. Once I have those lined up, I can remove the shadow box front. Now I can grab those stamps with the front of my stamp wheel, ink that up with a dark blue ink. This is the Sapphire ink from Pinkfresh Studio, which is one of the most beautiful, bold blues. So we'll have a tone-on-tone look here. I'll flip this over, press it down, and we have our stamped images. So this blue is what will show through that shadow box arch window. Next, I need something for my sentiment to sit on because I want it to look like it's floating in that window. Here's the sentiment I'll be using. I'll show you a little more about that sentiment later on. But we need a clear acetate piece to stretch across our window so that we can glue the sentiment on it so it floats. So I cut a thin strip of some scrap acetate from packaging would be fine. And I'm gluing the 2 ends of that on the back of our arch window. So now when I flip it over, you can see there is just this clear piece right across the window. We'll come back to adding that sentiment to that in a moment. First, let's create our note card so we can put the shadow box together. This is an 8.5 by 11 piece of cardstock, and I'm just folding it in half at 5.5 inches. I will then trim this down to be 5 by 7 inches. And this is how I go about creating a 5 by 7 card. There are different ways to do it. I just find that to be the easiest, and I can keep those leftover scraps for something else. To add this shadow box feature to the front of our note card, I'm putting strong liquid adhesive along those little flaps on those Z folds on the side of the shadow box feature. I'll place one of the flaps right along the edge of the note card, so right along the left edge of the note card where the crease of the card is. Then I fold the other so that other flap lines up with the other edge of the card over on the right. Then you want to hold this here, put something heavy on it while it dries. Then when you let go, notice how the front pops up, kind of creates a little arch or a dome there, which is really cool. All right, now we just need to add everything to it. I have this blue piece that I'm going to glue on the inside. I'll just slide it in there, and that will show through that opening. If you wanted to, you could have glued this piece down before adding the shadow box feature. Totally up to you. You'll see a few different ways to do that throughout this video. So now we can decorate this however we want. I'm using the floral pieces I created earlier and putting the arch along the top and the little corner floral element on the bottom right corner. And then we have our sentiment. The sentiment will get glued to that floating piece of acetate that we added behind the arch window. I wanted to show you where that sentiment is from. This is the new Pinkfresh Studio Happy For You stamp set. This has amazing sentiments in it and coordinating dies that cut them out nicely, which I'm so excited about. I'll use this several times in this video. There's also the big stamp that has 4 floral images. You can stamp all of those at once, then use the coordinating stencils to color them all at once, and the coordinating die to cut them all out at once. I really like that they do this because it makes it much faster to create several floral pieces. I will be using these floral pieces later in this video also. But for this card, I white heat embossed the sentiment that says "Thanks for all you do" onto navy cardstock, and I used the coordinating die to cut it out. Now I'm gluing that onto that acetate strip. Now I have an extra floral piece here, and I'm putting some adhesive on the front bottom of it, and I'm going to tuck that behind our sentiment and press the sentiment down on it. So now this flower kind of floats along with the sentiment. And from one of my extra floral pieces here, I'm cutting off a little end so that this will stick out from behind our sentiment on the bottom. So again, these floral pieces that I've added here are glued to the back of the sentiment, to the back of that acetate strip. So those float also. I love having those elements pop up when the card comes out of the envelope. Two last things to finish this card up. I'm using a dark blue marker just to add a little bit of dark color to my flowers so they pop a little bit more. You can do this with any marker or colored pencil, whatever you have. Then I also am using some glitter drops from Pinkfresh Studio. I am crazy about these. These are ombre glitter drops. It's kind of hard to see in the video, but you can see it in real life. The one I'm using here, or I'm showing you here, goes from half silver to gold. So it's like an ombre from silver to gold. This one here is like gold to navy. It really is a fun way to add a little more color and interest to your card. So I used the ones that have navy in it, and I added those kind of scattered on our card in the window itself and on the frame of the shadow box. Now this is all on the front of a 5x7 card, so it stands up nicely on display, and you have plenty of room to write a message on the inside. You could even do some additional stamping there if you wanted to. Here you can get a better look at how the shadow box kind of arches forward, which is really cool, and you have that window that gives so much fun dimension. Especially cool with the sentiment and those flowers floating on the inside. So this type of shadow box card I call a front shadow box card because it's on the front of a note card. Now that we've done a 5x7 version, let's do a 4 1/4 by 5.5 inch version because I know a lot of people like that size. Now you'll have dimensions for both size cards and you can try both. For this size, we need a piece of cardstock that is 6 1/4 inches wide and 5.5 inches tall. You're going to score both ends at 1/2 inch and 1 inch. So 6 1/4 inches by 5.5, scoring 1/2 inch and 1 inch from each end. Similar to what we did last time, we're just starting with a smaller piece of cardstock. We'll fold back along the inner score lines and then towards us on the outer score lines. So you get that panel with that little Z fold on both edges. Now I'm going to flatten that out and take one of the nested arches and tape it towards the center between the two inner score lines. As it's flattened out, those folds are flattened out, we'll run this through our die cut machine and that will create the window in the front of the shadow box. Very similar to what we did last time. Instead of stamping on the front of this time I'm using a cover plate. This is the Stitched Ovals cover plate, which doesn't cut anything. It just does a piercing pattern in a fun oval look. You can see the pattern there. And that's something that works really well with shadow box cards. I'll use that plate many times in this video. Next, I wanted to show how you can add supports to the front if you feel you need it, especially if you're using a lighter weight cardstock. Notice that the top and the bottom on the front of this card are very narrow. It's really easy to add some support to that. What I do is take some strips of acetate, just some thick acetate from packaging. I cut them into thin strips and I put double-sided tape along the acetate strip. You could even use just a strip of heavyweight cardstock here. And then I will adhere that to the back underneath our window. So you'll see I'll just add it below the window and then I'll do another that I'll add above the window. Now, I'm using a heavyweight cardstock for the front of the shadow box card, so I really don't need to do this. But if you are making yours and it feels a little flimsy, adding supports never hurts. Next, I have a piece of peach cardstock that I cut to be slightly smaller than our card. So this is about 4 by 5 1/4 inches. I'm laying our shadow box front on top of it, flattening it out, just so I can get the spacing right for this arch stamp. Now this is just going to add a little detail on the inside. You could do any kind of stamping or decorating that you want on that inside piece. This will just give some tone-on-tone subtle interest. All right, now for what's going to float in the middle of that window, I used a smaller nesting arch die to die cut a vellum piece. On that vellum piece, I will add some floral images and our sentiment, and we'll have that floating across the open window. Again, the best way to create a floating look inside of these shadow box cards is to cut a thin strip of acetate. So I've cut a piece here. Again, it doesn't matter how pretty it looks. You could use a thin strip of vellum, but that will show up more. So I'll flip over the front of my shadow box card and I will tape the ends of this acetate so that they're taped to the left and the right of the open window. Now onto this acetate strip, we can glue anything we want. I'm putting a little piece of double-sided tape and then I will lay that vellum arch right inside. I like how you can see around it and see through it. On top of that, I will add a sentiment. This says big hugs and happy thoughts. It is from a Pinkfresh Studio Circle Florals stamp set that I'll show you later in this video. And then I'm taking some of my extra floral die cuts, giving them a little bit of a haircut so I can tuck them behind that sentiment on top of the vellum so it peeks out the top and the bottom, just to add a pop of color there in the middle. So all of this that's sitting on that vellum die cut will look like it's floating when this is on our shadow box card front. Now let's put the card together. I have this stamped piece that's slightly smaller than our note card, and I'm gluing it onto the front of a 4 1/4 by 5.5 inch top folding white note card. You could do side folding if you prefer. Then we have the shadow box card front. We'll put a strong liquid adhesive on the flap on this side and then on the other side. Now these flaps will get glued right up to the edge of the card on both the left and the right. Now this time I'm kind of folding it in and then placing it down. You can do it this way or the way I showed earlier. You just want the edge of the flaps to line up with the edge of your card. Once you have them in place, you press that down, hold it there, or put something heavy on it while it dries. I highly recommend using a strong liquid adhesive for that so you have the wiggle room time before it dries so you can get it lined up just right. And now you can add anything you want around the front of the shadow box frame. I'm using these images that I have left over from the beginning. I did take a piece of scrap cardstock and slide it inside. I wanted to make sure that none of the glue oozed in to the opening of that arch. So that just kind of protected it. So here's the completed card. You can see it flattens nicely to go into an envelope. And when you take it out, it kind of pops forward, gives that shadow box look, and it has a little bit of an arch to it, which is really cool on display. We have that floating element there on the inside, but you can still peek behind it. You could do more on the inside if you wanted to, but I decided to keep it simple since everything on the front is decorated. I did add some of those gold silver ombre glitter drops. Love those for a bit of sparkle. So now we have done 2 shadow box front cards, one in 5 by 7, one in 4 1/4 by 5.5 inches. Both of them were portrait or standing up cards, tall cards. Now let's do horizontal or landscape or wide cards. So again, we'll do 5 by 7 first, then 4 1/4 by 5.5 inches. So this is a 5 by 7. You can see it's a sideways card. Everybody has a different term for that. But this also can work great for a shadow box design, and you can see how it gets even more dimension. It arches out even more. Now on this one, I'm using that Happy For You Pinkfresh Studio stamp set. I used this sentiment on my first card, actually. This time we're going to use some of the flowers and a sentiment. Now this stamp set does have the coordinating stencils, the coordinating dies. You can do all of it together with this or use them separately. Off screen, I did the stenciling over the layering stencils. Then I stamped the image on top of that and then used the coordinating die to cut it out. You can see I did a few batches here so I could create multiple cards. Here I'm going in with a marker just to add a little bit of darker color here and there for more contrast, but you could skip that if you wanted to. Okay, now let's do the front of this shadow box card. Remember, it's a wide card. This time you need to cut a piece of cardstock that is 5 inches tall and 9 inches wide. You'll once again score at a 1/2 inch and 1 inch from each end. And we will fold along those score lines as we've done already in this video many times. So just a reminder, this will give you a 5 by 7 card, but it is a wide card or landscape card. The one we did at the beginning of the video was 5 by 7, but it was a tall card or a portrait card. It's good to have the options so you can do whatever works better with the products you have. Now I'm going to get creative with my arch dies here and create a different shape window. Taking one of the arch dies, putting it on sideways as you see here, between those 2 inner score lines, but kind of off to the left a bit. I'm going to run that through my die cut machine. This will look a little silly at first, but watch what I do. I take that same die and rotate it and line it up. You'll see the straight edges of the die kind of pop into the opening that we have. Move it over to the right a little bit more, run it through my die cut machine again, and what we end up with is like this long oval window. So I used my arch dies to get a different look. Very easy to do and a great way to stretch that supply. So now we have a wide shadow box front for our card. Now I wanted to show you something different you could do on the inside of the card. So this time I thought I would add some texture to that inside piece. So I cut a piece of cardstock to be slightly smaller than 5 by 7. So this is about 6 3/4 by about 4 3/4, just a little bit smaller than 5 by 7. Now this piercing die isn't big enough to cover that whole thing. So what I'm doing is running it through on half of that cardstock. So I'll just tape that in there, run it through my die cut machine like I normally do. When I take it out, I'll shift the cover plate over a bit. And what I'll do is line up the piercing on the die with the holes already in our cardstock. You just wiggle it around. See, I'm wiggling around and the pattern will pop in. This is a repeating pattern. So see how it popped in right there. I'll tape it in place and then run it through again, and that covers our entire larger piece. This is a great way to take a smaller background die and use it on a bigger piece. I'm putting glue on the back of this and then adding it to a 5 by 7 note card. I created this one just like I did earlier in this video, and I'm taping it right there at the center. I did happen to make this piece a little narrow. It doesn't matter. It's going to get covered by that shadow box front. Once again, putting strong liquid adhesive on the 2 flaps of the shadow box front, and I will line this onto the front of our note card, making sure the edge of the flap lines up with the edge of the card on both sides. Give that a little bit of time to dry, hold it tight there, and now look at this. Watch how that just pops right up as soon as you take it out of an envelope. And you can see how this basic design right there can be used with so many different products. You could use different shape windows there. You could create 2 windows if you wanted to. Here I'm just gluing flowers on the top corner and the bottom corner, but you could do like a little scene with critters. You can do anything here. Now, after I've created these clusters of flowers, I'll add a sentiment. Again, I'm using the one that says, "Thanks for all you do." I just really like that, and I send a lot of thank you cards. I'm gluing the edges of this onto that floral bundle on the bottom, so when the card pops up, this will pop up with it. Now, since only a little bits there are glued holding that in place, I die cut another "Thanks for all you do" die cut, putting glue all over the front of it, and I'll slide this in behind the die cut that we already have on our card. So watch, I'll slide it in behind, and this will help to sandwich that little bit of the floral cluster between it, helping to make it more secure so that that sentiment will not fall off. Also, this makes it a bit stronger, so it pops up nice and bright and tall when you open up your envelope. I did take a few of the extra leaves and I'm gluing those to the blue background on the inside. So here this will give us more dimension. The flowers are up on the front of the shadow box. These leaves are on the inside, so it really adds to that shadow box feel. And notice how this card stands up really nicely on display. So it's a normal card, it'll open up normal, but it just has all that shadow box dimension on the front. I took one of my extra flowers and glued it on the inside just to pull it all together. I don't make landscape cards like this that often, cards that are wider than they are tall. However, I think it works really well with the shadow box because look at how much that kind of bows forward, giving such a unique look. Okay, so now that we've done the 5 by 7 landscape shadow box front card, let's do a quick 4 1/4 by 5 1/2 inch one so you know what dimensions you need to create that shadow box front. Now this time we'll start with a piece of cardstock that is 7 1/2 inches wide by 4 1/4 inches tall. And again, we'll score at a 1/2 inch and 1 inch from each end of the cardstock piece. And we will fold along those score lines as we've done many times in this video. You'll notice that that 1/2 inch and 1 inch score from both sides is common with all of these shadow box cards, even the different version we're going to do in a moment. I flattened that out, and right in the center there between the inside score lines, I used a circle to die cut a window. Again, you could do whatever shape you want. I'm using that oval intricate cover plate piercing die to add that little bit of detail to the front of it. I'll run that through our die cut machine, and really this is a pretty quick one to pull together. I wanted to add some shine to this, but I didn't feel like foiling again. So I took the circle die that we used to create our window, and then I took a circle die slightly larger than that. I taped them together on a piece of gold cardstock, ran that through my die cut machine, and you end up with this gold circle frame. And I'll glue that right around the opening on our window. So now it has that little bit of shine, framing it in and giving it a nice complete look. I have a 4 1/4 by 5 1/2 inch white note card with the score line along the long edge. I'm gluing the flaps of our shadow box up against the left and the right of our note card, lining it up on the left and the right. Once I've got it in place, I'll put something heavy on it and give it some time to dry. Now we can decorate. I took 2 of the larger flower clusters from the Happy For You stamp set and gave it a haircut. So I would just have this single blue flower with leaves and this single orange flower with leaves. I glued those around the circle, and then I glued the You Are Strong sentiment from the Happy From You stamp set. And I have it so it's suspended between the 2 flowers and just floating there above the circle. I took some of the extra leaves and glued that to the inside of the card so that we have all that dimension showing. I didn't add any sparkle to this. I kept this as is, and this is a pretty simple shadow box front card. So now we have done 4 different shadow box cards, 2 different sizes, 2 different orientations. Now let's do a completely different type of shadow box card. This one gives you more dimension and is really special. I have done videos on this many times. I will link to a very thorough one on it and how you can make things move on the inside and more. I'll link to that up here on the top right and at the end of this video. This is a little bit different than the first ones. This is a full-on shadow box. So you'll see from looking up from the top that it pops up even more for more dimension. We're going to start by doing this 5x7 version, and then we'll do the typical A2. For this type of card, you need 2 pieces of cardstock. So I have 2 pieces cut to 7 inches by 7 inches. And I, again, am scoring at 1/2 inch and 1 inch from each end. So this piece here is 7 by 7. I scored those lines. Now I have another 7 inch by 7 inch, scoring 1/2 inch and 1 inch from each end. I will fold along those score lines on both of these pieces just like we did last time. For the inner score line, I fold away from me. For the outer score line, I fold towards me, just creating this kind of Z fold on each side. And I'll do this exact same thing to both pieces. Once I've done it to both, you have 2 that look exactly the same, and these will go back to back. So the flaps on each will touch each other, but we're not going to glue it together just yet. On the front of one of those pieces, I will die cut a circle window, doing it centered but up towards the top a little bit. I also wanted to add that piercing texture to this, but my piercing die is a little too small. Here's another trick. I'm putting it right in the center but offset towards the top. I'll run that through my die cut machine, which will give it the piercing pattern. After running it through, I'll take that same piercing die, overlap it a little bit with the piercing we've already done until my die kind of pops right in, fits right into some of the piercing we've done. I just move it around and all of a sudden you'll feel it pop in place. Here I'm checking to see how I could line it up, but once you get it lined up, it'll pop in place. Watch, I'll keep moving. You just take a couple minutes to do it. Once it pops in place, tape it there, run it through again, and look at that. You have a long continuous pattern. There are 2 strips on the side where I didn't do the piercing, but it looks good in the end. You'll see in a moment. Next, I want to do that stamping on the peach cardstock on the inside of our shadow box. Let me show you what that's from. This is the Pinkfresh Studio nested circle dies. I'm using those today. There are coordinating foil circles that go with it, just like the nested ones we did earlier. I've used those before in a video. Now here we have the new around the shape circle stamp set. These stamp sentiments and circles fit inside of those circle dies nicely and probably fit inside of any circle dies you would have. So I'll be using one of those on this card and again later on. Once again, there is a floral that has floral arches that fit along those circles. Now this has the stamp set, the coordinating dies, and the coordinating layering stencils. I will use the floral images here later in this video, but for this one, I'm just going to be using the bigger stamp set over on the left. Notice what's cool about these floral layering stencils. They also have words on them. So you can stencil a word like maybe multicolor or rainbow, and then there are coordinating dies to cut them out. I love that that's all included in one stencil set, so you can get more bang for your buck. By the way, this is what the big hugs and happy thoughts comes from. All right, now I have a piece of peach cardstock that is cut to be slightly smaller than 5 by 7. So it's about 5 3/4 by 6, or I'm sorry, 4 3/4 by 6 3/4. I'm laying that into my stamping tool, putting the front of our shadow box on top so I know where to place this circle image. I will pick up that stamp, ink it up, and stamp it with a dark coral color. This is passion fruit for a little tone-on-tone stamping. Now this piece is going to get glued inside of our other shadow box piece. So between those inside fold lines, I'll just slide it in there and glue it in place. Now I'm putting glue on these flaps here. Liquid adhesive is best. And I will glue these flaps to our shadow box front. So it'll be flap to flap. So they'll get positioned together. You can see why liquid adhesive is handy here, so you can wiggle it to be just right. So I'll put the 2 flaps on the left together, then I'll press the 2 flaps on the right together. Make sure that you really get a good connection here, because this is what holds your entire card together. After the flaps are attached, I like to flatten it all down. So you kind of push those insides in, flatten it all down, put something on it, because this is how it'll be flat in an envelope. So you want to make sure it's flat at this point. Then once you've given it some time to dry, it pops up, creating a cool shadow box effect. Again, I've done this type of shadow box card many times in videos. I will link to it at the end of this one if you want a more complete way to do this. This, however, I think is the first time I've done a 5 by 7 version. All right, so I'm gluing some of those Happy For You flowers on the front of the shadow box and a couple on the inside, trying to do kind of a mirrored look here. So this will add to that dimensional look. I wanted my sentiment to float in the middle. Here's another way to make that happen. I'm using an action wobbler. This is like a little spring that flattens, and it has adhesive on both sides. So you put one side of it on the back of your sentiment or anything you want to wiggle, and then you remove the release paper from the other side and stick it anywhere on your card. I'm going to put it right there, smack dab in the middle of our shadow box window. So this spring, this action wobbler flattens to go through the mail, but then as soon as you take it out, it pops up and wiggles around, which is really fun inside of a shadow box window. If you don't have an action wobbler, you could definitely do the trick that I did earlier by having that piece of acetate stretched across. Many ways you could do it. Now, if you want to, you can glue a note card on the back of this, either 5 by 7 or smaller. Here I did a smaller note card. Or you can just write your personal sentiment directly on the back of the shadow box, which is what I normally do. But by putting this on the back, you can prop it up on display like an easel, but you don't have to. This shadow box stands up on its own without. So there you can see it can stand up with or without that card on the back. You can see this one pops up much more than the first versions that we did, and it comes up like kind of straight. It doesn't have that domed look to it. This is basically like 2 shadow boxes glued back to back, whereas the first cards we did in this video was just a shadow box glued onto a note card. So 2 different ways to do shadow boxes. I've given you the dimensions to do it either way, so you can try this, whichever version you want with the products you have. All right, now let's do the same type of shadow box with all this dimension for a 4 1/4 by 5 1/2 inch size. So now you'll have the dimensions for this one too. And I gotta say, I think this one's my favorite of the bunch, and it's probably the fastest one to do. Okay, this time we're starting with 2 pieces of cardstock, 6 1/4 inches wide, 5 1/2 inches tall for both pieces. On both pieces, I will be scoring a 1/2 inch and 1 inch from each end. So you may have noticed the dimensions for shadow box cards are the same whether you're doing a front of a card shadow box or a complete back-to-back shadow box card. Either version has the same size. If you want the complete shadow box card that really pops up, you're doing 2 of them and gluing them back to back. Okay, so I have these 2 pieces, both folded to be the same. One of them we're going to flatten out and use a circle die to cut kind of from the center of it, centering it between the 2 inside score lines. I'll tape it in place and run it through my die cut machine. Now I'm using that oval piercing die once again, placing it between the two inner score lines. Then I will run that through our die cut machine, and I love that detail. So much faster than getting out a stamp and ink and stamping on the front. Okay, now for the inside, I want some blue to show through. This is cut to be slightly smaller than our note card, so this is about 4 by 5¼ inches. Holding it behind our window there, and I'll place it down onto my stamp wheel. Into that opening, I will place this circle image from the circle frame stamp set that I showed you earlier. We'll grab this with the top of our stamp wheel, ink this up with a bright, darker kind of teal color. This is Tidal Wave, I think it's called, and this will give us a soft tone-on-tone look. I really like to keep what's going on the inside a little more subtle because we have so much going on the card design. Now, what I want to really stand out on this card is the sentiment that'll be on the inside. This time I'm stamping my sentiment directly onto the inside. I stamped it with Versamark ink and used white embossing powder, and I'll heat set it. So this time I don't have anything floating in our window. The window just kind of frames that sentiment that's on the inside of the shadow box. So I'll glue this onto the other shadow box piece right between the two inner score lines. And now we can glue the flaps of the front of our shadow box to the flaps of the back of our shadow box. Again, once you have the flaps on the sides together, I like to push them in and flatten it like I'm putting it into an envelope. Watch, I just kind of push those sides and flatten it and let it dry in that position. Now you can decorate the front however you want. I'm using those circle floral stamps that I showed you earlier. I did the stenciling on those, and then I stamped the outline over it and then used the coordinating die to cut them out. I did 2 of the same, so I could have an arch piece at the top, arch piece at the bottom, and that's it. I didn't add anything else to this. I felt like it had enough interest going on. You can see how this flattens nicely for an envelope, but really pops up to give a great shadow box effect. On this one, I'm just going to write my personal message directly on the back, or you can glue a note card on the back if you prefer. One thing about the flowers here, I did the stenciling with the layering stencils, and then instead of stamping the outline with black ink or gold heat embossing, I stamped the outline in a dark teal ink. I just thought that was a fun alternative and kind of blended in better with everything so that the focus would be on that sentiment on the inside. So don't think that you always have to use something basic for your outlines. You can use color for it too. Okay, so there you have several ways to do shadow box cards, different orientations, different sizes. I really hope you'll try these out. Really, it's a great way to step up your cards and use your supplies creatively. I will link here at the end to other shadow box card videos so you can learn more. And I do link to all of my supplies in the description if you want to check those out. Thank you for watching, and I'll see you soon with another video.